So first of all, we, as OJ said earlier, we're not going to go with his doom and gloom to start with. We're going to go with something hopefully a little bit more positive to start with, and run through just everybody's experiences over the Christmas period and then Q1 performance. Hopefully some positives in there. I know it's still challenging for everyone. But then also probably the two key bits that that everybody is here for, and OG then is going to cover, is around the business rates consultation and then the Licensing Act consultation, because obviously there are two key pieces there that I think we both need to draw your attention to and just possibly have some discussions about in terms of feedback. So just I suppose for the bids and the local authorities, in terms of the Christmas period and the Q1 performance, I'll just open the floor if that's okay, and just come in and let us know what your experiences were over those periods, really. Shall I start off? I'll start off a little bit of Blaen y Gwent then, whilst everybody's sort of pulling their bits together. But from our side, Kieran's obviously on here and she can give a little bit more info later if needed. But we did do events across all of the towns. During the events themselves, it was positive in terms of footfall. But I think we did still see drops in footfall on previous years. So I think we are seeing that the cost of living is having an impact in the Blaen y Gwent area. People are shopping, but they're not necessarily in the numbers that they were before. And then in terms of Q1, I think it's been challenging from our side in terms of people. So Kieran, do you want to come in and give a little bit more detail, because you've been more on the ground for Q1?
Yeah, I think that the spend just isn't there in the towns. The essential shopping, obviously, that remains. But when I speak to the businesses in the non-essential, the gift shops and so forth, they're just saying people are just not coming in, and if they do come in, they browse, but they don't buy. So I think everyone is looking for a deal, and whether the deals are online and the competition is there, but they certainly, the non-essential stores in the town are really struggling. You can see sale signs up, they offers, but the energy prices are affecting the stores themselves as well, even to the point I've been in stores and they wrapped up in coats and scarves, the sales staff, because they're trying to minimize the cost of heating the shop. So it certainly is having an impact.
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. Does anybody else want to come in on that as well?
Yeah, I think largely from the Vale of Glamorgan Council's point of view, footfall is declining, unfortunately. But many of the shops, the actual basket sales have been increasing. I've got an added issue now. Yesterday, we were informed that WH Smiths and Barry Town Centre are moving out to the town. They've been involved. Their lease has expired and it's no longer viable for them to continue trading in the town centre. I'm also getting feedback from another number of the traders that there's one particular landowner who owns a good proportion of the town centre, is pushing up rents by up to 35%, which seems extremely high in the current economic climate. I don't know if anybody, representatives here got any ideas how, I know we can't sort of really get involved too much as a local authority in determining how, the price of rents. However, is there any way we can influence of these landlords to take a more realistic approach to the level of rents they're asking for?
Yeah, OJ, do you want to come in on any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, we always been a big challenge, and for us, one of the things we need to do is we need to see much more in terms of collaboration between property owners and everyone else, including businesses, communities and local government. It was actually the theme of the conference we had for our place management gig back at the end of February. which was that we need more collaboration, because sometimes some of the actions of some stakeholders doesn't necessarily work in tandem with what everybody else is doing. And certainly things around rents and property owners being able to do a bit more to support new businesses, startups, etc. There is more that could be done, let's say. And it's not always the fault of the property owners, because as I will show, they've got their own bills to pay. They've got their own liabilities. But we do need to change how the system works to allow property owners to be able to take a risk here and there.
Yeah, does anybody else want to come in on the back of that? Andrew?
Yeah, I won't give you about property owners, but roughly that I think the same as everyone else, it's a challenging market out there. We've had 21 new businesses open in Bridgend Town Centre since April last year. So it was their first Christmas, and we've supported them through, we did a campaign called Spend Christmas in Your Town Centre, and that was a mixture of digital events. So we had a town centre app for each town, we had a digital website, then we had events in each town with the town councils, and then we did a film about spending the day in your town centre over Christmas. But I would concur with what Chris has said. You know, the nationals particularly are the worry, because where the independents are making decision based on what comes through the door, the nationals obviously are a national picture, and you worry about someone just deciding to close 5 stores. I mean, we lost a Shaw's store in Bridgend, and one of the things that we've got now is obviously units that are too big for independents that are vacant in the town centres. So that's a challenge. But I have to say, we've got a fantastic employability team, which is sort of equivalent to economic development that I've worked with before, and they've been really proactive in supporting new business ideas. So we've got a street market that comes in every month in Porthcawl and Bridgend now. So what we do is we offer space to someone in that market as a kind of trial for a new business idea. Then we look to put them into the indoor market in Bridgend, and then we look to put them into one of the shopping centre units. So we've had 2 or 3 businesses that have taken that route, and we've actually managed to grow a business like that. But obviously, you know, that takes time. So this year the markets start again in April, and the hope is that we can get a couple of people who are trialing, and employability are going to take a number of stalls there and kind of do a mini market within the market, again trying to get new business ideas off the ground. But you know, as everybody knows, spend is the big thing, and I find the further north in the county borough that I go, so my stake is our most northerly point, it's a valleys community, and that is particularly cost of living conscious at the moment. So that's the one that the retailers will tell me that the discretionary spend is just being turned off. So hopefully that's a bit, some useful information.
That's great, Andrew, and it's something I've actually spoke to the markets industry about is if we've got a fair few retailers that haven't made it through the pandemic, then we can use retail markets as a way to get new entrepreneurs onto the high street, low cost, low risk for them, test a business model. And you can set up almost like a progression to eventually get them into high street property further down the line. And I think we're looking to try and take that to government to say, look, we need to support the grassroots of the retail sector, because that can help give us a pipeline of new retail businesses in the future that might have some exciting, fairly dynamic business models going forward. That sounds like it's a potential case study. So yeah, that sounds like some really good work.
Yeah, thanks, OJ. And I think I would echo that. That's some really good ideas there, Andrew. I think definitely some elements for us all to take away and look at. I can see Owen's got his hand up as well. So I don't know, Owen, do you want to just come in there as well?
Yeah, I was just going to give you some insights around, we're currently working across 7 or 8 towns in Wales, doing various regeneration placemaking work. So kind of picture that we've seen. So we're working in Wrexham, which is Wales's newest city, and also Llanytid Wells, which is Britain's smallest town. So we're dealing with towns of all shapes and sizes. I think I think there's still a COVID weariness and kind of financial hangover that we're experiencing. It's interesting when you talk to businesses that are closing down, when you talk to them why that is, and it's because they feel a little bit battered by the last few years. It's quite hard, and January has been a month for rent renewals and also for lease renewals. So we've seen people stepping away from high street retail because they just feel as if they don't want to sign up for anything for the longer term. But then at the same time, seeing that and this is mainly independents, where independents are kind of closing down, that there is still some interest in independent businesses stepping in. I've seen some interesting examples of independents crowdfunding to do shop fit outs, because obviously the upfront costs are fairly significant for any new business. So here in Abergavenny, where we're based, a bookshop did a online crowdfund to raise, I think it was about £5,000 to £6,000 to fit out the shop in order that they could reoccupy a vacant shop, which is kind of fairly innovative, controversial, I would say at the same time. But, you know, you can see some of that. And also, I'd say when you talk to the hospitality sector, they're still talking about staffing issues as fundamental to their business. And I know a couple of businesses we've spoken to, they've closed simply because they just can't get staff, and the prospects of reopening are difficult as well. So I think that's kind of just a kind of a headline summary of what we've experienced across many towns working in Wales. Hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks, Owen. I think yeah, a couple of extra points there. I had saw the crowdfunding one for the bookshop, and as you say, it is a little controversial, but you know, if people are willing to put the money in, then obviously they do it willingly, so that's fine. But yeah, I thought that was quite different in terms of something as an ask of the community. George.
Hi, just to come in on that point there that Owen's made, you know, there is money available in some of the shared prosperity funds as well for high street to develop their businesses. Those funds are live now. Sometimes the difficulty is for the local authorities to actually get that information out to the people that actually require it. Again, following on from Owen, Owen did some work for Carmarthenshire County Council, and 17% of the money that comes in through the tills in Carmarthen, some of it's £100 million, comes from visitors to the town. And there are several pieces of legislation coming down the track. One comes live on the 1st of April, and then we're looking at other things like levies, etc., tourism levies, etc., the possibility of a change in the school year, etc. There's numerous things coming down the track, and many will be in the hands of local authorities to make decisions on. And I would just urge those of you who do work for councils, if you have any opportunity to influence your councils, to try and make sure they don't batter the tourism sector any harder than needs be, because we're going to be driving people away. Remember, this is going on in Wales and Wales alone. It's not going on in border counties. It's not going on in Bristol. It's not going on in Cornwall and Devon. So we're going to become very uncompetitive, and we will lose an awful lot of businesses as this kicks in. You know, many people don't actually realise that in the tourism sector. This was highlighted, you go back several years to when the foot and mouth disease was prevalent. There was two large laundrette businesses in mid Wales that went under, and they went under because there was no walkers, there was no people going to the B&Bs. They had no comprehension that they were actually part of the visitor economy because they were further down the food chain, and the high street is so dependent upon them. One other thing I think we should be trying to encourage is our local authorities. This might not please many of you working from home, but some town centres rely 4 to 7% of the turnover is from office workers. And you know, anything that can be done to get people back into the town centres, I think has to be welcomed. Thank you, Amy.
Yeah, and I think a lot of valid comments there, you know, particularly around the office workers. You know, I know just from our local authority experience, we actually closed and demolished our building as a civic centre. So and it's very close to the town, so we do have to encourage our staff in different ways to now continue to use the towns, because obviously we don't even have a building there anymore. So I can imagine that the town, you know, will be impacted by that. But yeah, I think the understanding of the overall picture, how people feed into the supply chain, again, is a really important one, because it all feeds in and it all is valuable contribution. So yeah, one element falls away, then that impacts, has a bit of a domino effect on other elements as well. Does anybody else want to come back in on any points, just particularly around, obviously, any experiences around Christmas, and then just sort of performance in January? Any sort of key points, any good news stories, or any any more challenges that anybody's come up against?
Just to put a York perspective in there, I think we had a fairly successful Christmas. I think we're lucky in York, and we have a large Christmas market, and it does drive footfall in. I think, yeah, across the board, a lot of retailers were happy that they were kind of beating 2019 figures. But as someone said before, it definitely depended on the kind of retail as well. Some of that non-essential stuff was still dropping below. I think we've been quite lucky in the first quarter. I think us directors and businesses as well have all been expecting there to be a bit of a lull, but while it's been quieter, I think we've again been lucky with maybe staycation visits and visitors from around the country, and obviously foreign people returning when they couldn't previously. I suppose as a good news story, we put an event on, we put some projections on the Minster in February. We intentionally chose like a quiet, dark time. We did 2 weeks, which covered the 2 half terms of that area as well. It was really successful. We think we had about 45,000 people come view it. It was obviously free, but it drove people in. And then it's quite nice to get even anecdotal stories from businesses saying that they ran out of food during the week, so they couldn't sell, which I think we'll take as a win. And then the final thing I'll say is just, yeah, absolutely agree with what was said before. I think we're doing really well with independents in the city, and I can, start naming streets which are just entire independents, where if a business goes empty, it's not empty for long. There's that natural and positive churn. But the kind of rhetoric in York is the high street's dead, and that's because we've got 2 or 3 major streets which used to be your BHSs and your Debenhams and things, and they are just not refilling. Interestingly, there's a few on one of our main streets, Davygate, which have broken down. So one of the old Debenhams is now 4 units, and that's actually filling with high-end jewellers. So hopefully that might be a way forward. It's taken 3 years of an empty unit on the worst, one of the most prominent streets, but yeah, hopefully we'll see a bit more of that, where landlords are breaking down the buildings, decreasing the rent, decreasing the RV, and making it accessible for independents.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. So I think, obviously, as you say, I think York is very very tourist focused, so I think there's a lot of positives there from the tourism side, but I think the challenges are still there around the bigger units, and we've got that experience, not necessarily perhaps in the same numbers, but we have had units in key parts of our towns where have been national retailers. They're significant units, and then they're vacant, and they've been vacant now for a number of years. One that we're particularly struggling with, and Kieran can come in a little bit more on this potentially, but it's an old Peacock store that the obviously administrators are still in touch with. There is no movement because the landlord is still getting relief because of the administration. So from our side, we want to push the landlord around getting somebody in there, but they're just like, well, we're getting income, or we're getting relief. We don't really care. Don't know if you want to come in there, Kieran, around that.
Yes, it's a real blot in the town. It's a big store. We've put a vinyl wrap in there to make it look better, but it's still an empty, vacant shop. I've contacted the owner numerous times. We've actually had an estate agent up there to consider renting it, and when he is looking to rent it, is going back to what somebody said earlier, he still wants the rent that he was having pre-COVID. He's not going to achieve it, but there's just no movement. He's very reluctant. He's got an exemption on the property. He's out of the area. And even though I say, you know, the residents are desperate to see this filled, we've done public consultation, it was the top points that everybody wanted to know. The landlord just isn't interested, and it's really difficult then, because, you know, the building is going to go into decline. Inevitably, it's been empty now for, I think it's coming up 3, possibly 4 years. And you know, the largest store in the shop, and it could be so much more. Like somebody mentioned, even if we used it as a you know, for markets, indoor markets, to, you know, to allow people to test trade would be good, but at the moment it's just locked up and really is causing us problems.
Thanks, Kieran. I think, go on, Karen, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, sorry, a similar thing happened in another town centre a long time ago when Asda George, their store, they moved out, they decanted to a retail park. They had a 25-year lease on the shopping centre. They were still paying £400,000 a year rent on it. They didn't care. They just did not care. And I actually fed it into the Portus review of the issue of absent landlords. And in the end, they had to buy out the lease in the end, but it just created so many problems. And it is something where you're more or less powerless to do anything. It looks like a vacant unit, but it's not really a vacant unit, because really it's occupying, there's money being made on it. And I think it's something that across the board, not just obviously where you are, but across the board, that does need to be looked at when there's those spaces. And it is, and it stops investment in other areas as well. You know, so I fully sympathise with that argument. Yeah. Bad news.
Yeah, thanks all. And I think, OJ, I think that leads on quite nicely now onto your update, doesn't it? So thanks for all the comments, I think, around that. I think there's obviously some really common themes, but also I think some good points that we can all take away as well, and some elements that we can all look at. But let's move on to OJ's update. Over to you, OJ.
Thanks a lot, Amy. Right, let me get the technology working. It is a really good segue. There is a challenge brewing in terms of commercial property, which is quite serious. So what I'm going to do, we've got 2 consultations. The first one is a bit of an update, followed by consultation on business rates, which is where we'll look at the challenges around commercial property. And then the second one is it will be a fairly quick consultation just on an update with regards to the Licensing Act. So let's get started. And this feels like a bit of a tangent to begin with, but you will see why this is important very soon. So Deutsche Bank has been in the news for those of you who have been paying attention. And the reason why they've been in the news is actually quite a serious one, is we have economic problems brewing. Deutsche Bank, who is one of Europe's big financial institutions, at one point their share price had fallen by 14%. On Friday, which is significant. I think a 14% fall in one day is when you start to question the viability of the institution, which could lead to all sorts of other ramifications. So that's quite scary. There was a bit of a rebound later on that Friday, and then a bigger rebound yesterday morning, thankfully. So at least for the short term, hopefully we are past the worst, but there is a shadow looming large over financial institutions. The problems with Deutsche Bank are that they are next on the list of companies which a lot of investors are worried about. We've already lost Credit Suisse, who had to be taken over by UBS. They followed Silicon Valley Bank over in the west side of the US, taken over by First Citizens Bank shares, and also HSBC for their UK arm. And the US also lost Signature Bank as well. So all of a sudden, we've got a chain of events where a number of banks are going under. And that is a problem, not least because of contagion. Investors know the issue of contagion, and they're looking for the similarities behind these banking failures. And they are getting nervous, and they're starting to pick on specific institutions where they no longer have any trust in. That's where Deutsche Bank has fallen foul. there are fears that we might be at the beginning of a new banking crisis. And this is 15 years after the last one. And governments are working hard to alleviate these fears by saying, we will secure deposits, we will secure your money. There is no problem. Fundamentally, these banks are strong, because it's the fear itself can be enough to bring down any financial institution once there is a run on those banks. So why the fear? Where is the fear coming from? What commonality is there between those banks which we have already lost and those which might be teetering on the brink? So I've been looking at this, and what most people tend to say is that during an era of low interest rates, some of the banks have been a little bit complacent in terms of their investments, in terms of their leverage. And there is this thing called hidden leverage. I think the term is shadow debt, that's made its way into the system, which is now becoming a problem because of the change in interest rates. So the theory is from Bloomberg UK specifically, is that over the course of the pandemic, people accumulated debt pretty quickly. Some people weren't able to work, some businesses weren't able to operate, they accumulated debt. We asked the banks to be sympathetic. We asked them not to close down businesses, not to call in those debts, not to allow people to be evicted from homes, etc. And so that debt remained on the books. And to a certain extent, it wasn't a problem because the risk was a lot lower during an era of really, really low interest rates. However, over the past year, that debt has all of a sudden become pretty unmanageable, and it leaves the banks pretty much exposed to all sorts of challenges. And we'd hope that the banks wouldn't have those challenges, because ultimately, 15 years ago, during the past financial crisis, we asked a lot of banks to tighten up on their lending rules, and to make sure they've got enough capital on their books so that they can cover any short-term challenges. And the pandemic has obviously changed that, because they've turned that blind eye to debt accumulation to shield people from bankruptcy. Also, the types of investments those banks take on as well have been influenced by an era of low interest rates. So they've taken on certain risks which maybe in higher interest rates they wouldn't necessarily take on. And the world is changing. Today, we are being consumed by the inflation crisis, which is causing the problems we have with the cost of living. And that changes the maths for a lot of banks. And this is continuing. Last week, ONS surprised us all with the shock news that inflation had actually increased in February to 10.4% from 10.1% when we were expecting a decline. The price of food and non-alcoholic drinks especially is a problem, accelerating to 18.2%, the highest pace in more than 45 years. So inflation is going up when really it should be going down. So that's some real challenges. So we know what the economic fallout of that is for the UK. Even Michael Gove now is admitting the UK is just poorer as a country as a result. The Office for Budget Responsibility estimating that we are in the middle of the biggest 2-year fall in income since records began. But the real challenge the banks have is that in terms of the fight against inflation, for them, the cure is probably worse than the disease itself. And that is the increase in interest rates, because it's the only tool the central banks have at their disposal to combat high inflation. And that is higher interest rates. And that's where the maths change for a lot of the financial institutions. So last week, the Bank of England increased interest rates to 4.25%, the 11th consecutive increase. And the speed of the increases has caught so many financial institutions out. So for some banks, what not too long ago appeared to be a sound investment and lending strategy, today, that could threaten their very existence. And now the challenge of contagion is a real issue. And unfortunately, not only can we say that the challenge for high streets is partly the cause of the challenges financial institutions are facing now. But high streets will also face a backlash from it as well. They could well get caught in a crossfire. This article from The Guardian yesterday saying that the next big banking crisis could cause offices to be the next real casualty. So The Guardian's reporting that higher interest rates and cuts in lending could pile pressure onto the commercial property sector, with offices especially facing the perfect storm. And in that article, reading through, I saw this graph and it's pretty scary. So you can see the dip right at the end of the graph. And I kid you not, guys, I thought, yes, that's the dip from the pandemic and the restrictions. It's not. It's actually not. So you see the value of commercial property sort of wobble from 2010 through to 2013, which I think is a hangover from the last massive financial crash we had, and then solid growth between sort of 2013 and 2016. The obvious dip, which I see in almost every graph I look at when it comes to 2016, I'm not sure what happened then. Slow growth between 2016 to 2010, 2021. And that first dip then after that is the dip from the pandemic. But look what happens from 2022 onwards. It's dropping off a cliff. And that means there's some real challenges around the commercial property sector that we've not really acknowledged yet. So there's big issues coming in. I don't know where the fallout will come from, but there could well be a fallout. So what I need to do is I need to probably drill into these details, this data a bit more, to find out a little bit more about what's happening in the property sector. George Gatch, the CEO of JP Morgan Asset Management, is concerned both for the retail market and for the office market. What he says in relation to the Federal Reserve, which is the US central bank, our equivalent of the Bank of England, he says when the Federal Reserve hits the brakes, something goes through the windshield. So what he's referring to there is the increase in interest rates. Commercial real estate is an area of concern. We have higher interest rates for property developers. How does that impact the real estate market and lenders in that space? And he is talking specifically about a real concern he has for retail and offices. Despite all this over here, business rates bills for offices in particular are likely to go up on the 1st of April. So their costs are going to get higher. So this graph from the Valuation Office Agency, you can see here that while the retail sector should be paying less in business rates overall from the 1st of April, offices for Wales is going to be just over 5% increase, which is unbelievable considering what the sector's been through with regards to hybrid working and the pandemic and work from home. And it's a clear sign that the tax system in this particular instance isn't helping us when it comes to the economic challenges we face. And to remember, most reliefs we've had throughout the pandemic have been for retail, hospitality and leisure. I think offices don't get a lot of relief when it comes to business rates. So it's yet more evidence that the tax system is a challenge, and certainly a challenge for some parts of our commercial property sector, which are going through a difficult time, which could be all wrapped up in some real difficult economic problems we've got at the moment. Now we've got an opportunity for change, because obviously at the last meeting, not only did we discuss the consultation which was put out from the Welsh government around business rates, but we're not that far from a UK general election, and business rates has already been put on the agenda for reform. So for us here, it's already started. ATCM Wales, late last year, following our meeting together, myself, Amy and also Carolyn from Cardiff met with Welsh Government civil servants to go through options to make the system work better in the short term. Those ideas included possible lower tax rate for main town centre uses that are actually located in town centres rather than out of town, and also looking at the closing of loopholes around empty property, where landlords might shout out about how they're going to transform the property, use it for charitable purposes to extend the time they get rate relief for, looking at how we can get round that type of manipulation of the system. So all the things which you guys fed back to us at the last meeting, we've put forward to civil servants. So we will see what comes from that. But we also need to get serious now about long-term reform, because it was made quite clear to us then that while it's not something they're going to do, they can do immediately, always on the back burner, the Welsh government are thinking about what long-term reform might look like. And also in terms of the UK general election, the Labour Party has gone first and they have said they will scrap business rates. It's now a case of thinking what will come next following business rates. And that's something I think they're consulting on, and they're looking at different ideas already. Whether they will come up against the same challenges that the current UK government has and maybe backtrack on this and maybe put it to reforming business rates rather than scrapping it, I don't know. But certainly any ideas around changing business rates or something else, I think right now is fair game. So that's something I think we should take a look at. So we've had some thoughts around this. It's something we've obviously looked at for years. There are no ideal alternatives, but there is an idea we've had, and so we want to float it with you guys. It might be that parts of this work, it might be that parts of this doesn't work. It will be the first time I've presented this idea. So honestly, guys, all honest feedback is useful. And then what I will do is, as the consultation with other members across the ATCM network continues, we will update these ideas to reflect views so far. So there are two main front runners, I think, that have really emerged as a possible replacement for business rates, which have been discussed. And if I'm being honest, neither is quite ideal. Firstly, there is land value tax, and then there is an online sales tax. So just in terms of the land value tax and how it works, so business rates is a tax on the businesses that occupy property. And if that property is empty, then it's a tax on the landlord that owns the property. What a land value tax would do is it would transfer that liability from the business occupier to the person or entity that actually owns the land the property sits on. It then means the assessments have to change in value as well. So you're not valuing the actual property, but you are valuing the land the property sits on. So both what you are taxing and who you are taxing changes. It's a subtle change because we're still ultimately taxing something which is physical, which is immovable, much like business rates, but it does change. There are positives to this. The land value tax is tried and tested elsewhere. I think there's a number of countries that actually use a land value tax system. It means we've got learnings we can go from. It means it's easier to implement. It's a little bit less bureaucratic as well. So you are taxing the value of land. It is something which is far easily done than having to tax each individual non-domestic property across Wales or across England or across Scotland, whatever nation we might be looking at, because that is quite a bureaucratic system we have at the moment. Another positive is landowners benefit from the accumulation of wealth because a land becomes more value as more development happens. However, at the moment, they're not taxed on that increase in value of their land. So they are outside the tax system. There is no contribution they have to make. They absolutely should be making a contribution. If there is development happening on that land, whether it's their infrastructure or property, whatever, and it makes the land more valuable, and they get wealthy as a result, there should be a contribution to the tax system. Absolutely. And I think most people would actually see that as fair. And another positive is that because we're not directly taxing the property, it means all of a sudden, those people that own the land know that in terms of economically, they have to get the most out of the land. They have to make that land work. They have to use it. So therefore, things like land banking, things like holding on to underused land in high demand areas, like in a town centre, where a site might be neglected. If you're going to be taxed on that land, then all of a sudden you have an incentive to make sure it's used well, it's brought back into use. All of a sudden you have a real incentive to develop that land. For those people managing property as well, if you want your property to be more energy efficient, want it to be net zero, it's a shop and you want to modernize it to be more consistent with modern day retail. Right now, if you invest in that property, you will get hit by higher business rates as a result. Under a land value tax, you can invest in that property without that extra cost because it's not that property directly that's being taxed. So you have a huge incentive now to be able to modernize. So we would think in terms of investment in the built environment, it would be a huge benefit. Another positive as well is sometimes absentee landlords and absentee landowners are a huge problem to regeneration. Having a land value tax means we'd have to have a functioning land registry, which would completely change the game for a lot of us. It might make it feasible to actually bring landowners around the table when we talk about regeneration. The negatives are that landowners will likely pass those costs down the chain. So it will get passed on probably to the property owner, who will pass it on to the business occupier, who could still end up absorbing the cost. So just because you have a land value tax because of business rates, it doesn't mean the business doesn't end up paying in some way. They could still end up paying. And this also does not account for the growth in the digital economy. It is online, it is the digital economy that has changed the game in terms of business rates and makes business rates not function well, because business rates is purely about physical property. If we go to a land value tax, we're still looking at landowners having to pay the exact same amount as we contribute in business rates at the moment. And so making it a like-for-like replacement means we still have an unsustainable tax burden. And finally, and I think this is inevitable, landowners will obviously resist this move because they wouldn't want to be burdened with the tax. So there would be a huge challenge with it. And then quickly, just in terms of online sales tax, the way we would probably see this working is a flat tax applied to each transaction is usually the proposal that's put forward. And the tax revenue that is apportioned from that sale should be allocated to the place where the purchase is actually made. So if myself if I'm in Cardiff, for example, and I buy something online from whatever retailer it might be anywhere in the world, then the tax revenue should be apportioned to Cardiff because that's where the sale is actually made. And then that hopefully gets around the issue of some online retailers who will use their location to be able to minimize their tax implications. The tax is not a natural replacement for business rates, though. This is something we have to bear in mind. A lot of the early proposals have been that online sales tax would sit alongside business rates, not replace it. I think a land value tax would probably replace business rates. That won't happen with an online sales tax. So the positives of this is it would be the first time we're able to properly bring online retailers in a way which is more comprehensive to actually contribute to the tax system to pay for local services and infrastructure. At the moment, we sort of get around it by including warehouses in the business rates contribution, but I'm not sure that's that feels to me like a fairly clunky way of being able to do it. So this would be a proper tax. It would level the playing field. between online and physical retailers, and could well swing the balance of investment back from online onto the high street and make the high street much more affordable as a place to invest. But there are plenty of negatives for this tax as well. It would be a new tax. I don't know where in the world has successfully implemented an online sales tax. So it would be complicated to implement. It could be volatile. One of the things that any government likes about business rates at the moment is that you basically set how much you want to collect from property, and then you go out and you collect it. An online sales tax would be determined by how sales are doing. In a cost of living crisis, sales go down, you collect less tax, and so you have less money for local services. That might not necessarily be attractive or appealing to any tax authority. Also, because the online sales tax cannot act as a replacement for business rates, there are lots of challenges around this. So one of the challenges is that retailers will be resistant to the implementation of an online sales tax because so much of them now will have their own online operation, so they will rightly fear double taxation. We also have to consider the aspect that there are lots of properties ultimately which are covered by business rates at the moment, which have no sales attributed to them at all. So that's what makes it really difficult to make an online sales tax a replacement for business rates, because a hospital, a school, an office, all of these buildings will pay business rates, but there will be no sales directly attached to them. So they couldn't be included in the new tax system. So that would be a huge challenge. The challenge of double taxation then comes up for those retailers that are both on the high street and trade online. So taking all of that into account, and I'm sorry this is really complicated, but guys, I need your feedback on this, and I hope you're ready. So this is the proposed solution, and the reason why I've highlighted both online sales tax and land value tax is because my current thinking at the moment is that business rates should be abandoned. It has to be abandoned because the system just doesn't work. And it is dead in the water. And I think the fact that we've had so much rates relief for so long now in different forms, whether it's small business rates relief, charitable rates relief, or the current rate relief during the pandemic, is all a sign that the tax doesn't actually function properly. And it just needs to go. I think the proposed solution is actually both taxes. So you get rid of business rates and you replace it both with a land value tax and an online sales tax as well. And what you do is that whatever is collected in business rates at the moment, you look to split that revenue between a land value tax and an online sales tax. So it might be that 50% of the current contribution of business rates you now collect through land value tax, and the other 50%, or maybe it's 60-40 or 70-30, and the rest of that is collected through an online sales tax. So you split where the income comes from, and that's all invested into local services and infrastructure. And the aim should be that ultimately, at the end of the day, through that, high street businesses will pay less, online retailers will pay more to cover the business, to cover high street businesses, but multi-channel retailers pay roughly the same. That would be the aim of the tax system, and that's really crude, and it's probably not going to work out like that realistically, but that's what we should be aiming for. And the desired outcome would be ultimately more investment in high streets and the built environment, both because high streets and the built environment will pay less tax because more of that tax is coming through from online, but also because the taxes there is then better structured to incentivize the proper use of land, and also to get around the issue of absent landowners. Landowners become easy to engage on regeneration issues, and you have that level playing field with online businesses. And finally, what we can also do as well, because it is so bureaucratic to run the business rate system through the VOA, is that resource allocation can actually go into running an online sales tax instead. So it shouldn't cost us any more to resource one tax over the other. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to take a deep breath, and I'm going to open up for questions and comments for more, and see what you think. And I am floating these ideas out there for the first time. So feel free to shoot me down if you want to shoot me down. We're all friends here.
Owen, do you want to come in there?
Hi, thanks, OJ. I think you put out a fairly convincing proposition. I think with anything like this is the political acceptability of it, because this has to kind of win votes, doesn't it? And I just wonder, you already mentioned this. I think the challenge is that lots of businesses currently don't pay business rates because they're under the small business rates threshold, and anything that hints at them having to carry that burden, because as you've already mentioned, if there's a land value tax that ultimately then gets carried through to property owners and then to occupiers, that is going to be seen as a cost. And I just wonder how we package this so that, you know, there has to kind of be some kind of mechanism which protects small businesses that sits alongside the land value tax, that gives small businesses who currently pay nothing or pay very little some degree of comfort. Because if without that, I don't think this isn't going to get support. That's not to say it's not a good idea. It's just like we know with anything, it's actually how do you win the argument as opposed to is it a good idea? So I just wondered about that really. So I think that was my main point. So my phone just went off. I got distracted by that.
I think it's an excellent point, and I think it's something I'm certainly more than happy to have the discussion on as well, because like I say, there's probably going to be all sorts of holes everywhere in this, because it's the first time I've put these ideas out there. But it's definitely worth having that conversation. I think what I would say, this is for people to discuss openly, because people might have different views on this, is that do we want to completely shield small businesses altogether, or should we be asking everybody that plays a part in the high street to contribute something? However, the amount they contribute should be fair and aligned to the size of their business, because I think the reason for small business rates relief in the first place is because the business system doesn't work properly. Ultimately, if we'd exposed a lot of small businesses to the cost of the business rate system, it would have been simply unfeasible for them to grow. It would have been unworkable. Under a fairer system where we're massively cutting the cost of the tax that would be paid by businesses on the high street, because even if landowners pass the costs of that down, we're only asking them to pick up what might be a fraction of the current cost of the business rate system. Would it make it more feasible for them, or is this, and I think Owen, what you might be suggesting, even if it's a little bit politically, that might not send out the right message, because going from paying nothing to paying something, even if it's a small something, politically, that message might not necessarily work.
I totally accept this. Kind of, you're putting this out there, and the devil is always in the detail. I learned, you've already thought this through, I know, but it kind of feels to me that those are kind of challenging questions that you're going to face with this proposal. I think the two-tier principle of land value and online retail sales is exactly how we kind of should start this conversation. It's just kind of almost saying, look, we recognise there's need to be a mechanism here that protects the smallest. That's not to say that they don't pay anything, but maybe, like, you know, I have an office, I have a business rates bill, and I always worry about what it's going to look like. And it's probably like any business, they want it to feel fair and they want a degree of certainty. you know, because you can plan around that. But property owners who can kind of hike rents, as Chris said earlier, willy-nilly, should they wish to, and kind of decide to pass on costs however they wish because they have that independence to do it, that probably creates a little bit more fear within small businesses. Maybe I know I got a good landlord, but if I knew that he was going to start passing business rates on to my rent, I'd have a nervousness about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see that. And I think for small business, you're right. And this is exactly the type of thing we should be discussing. This is exactly the type of thing I haven't fully thought through yet. And I need people to flag it up so we can have that conversation. I think in terms of, especially thinking specifically about the impact of small businesses that aren't paying anything, for most of the businesses, ultimately, even if the landowner passes the cost down, that bit I'm not so concerned about, because what we're effectively saying is that for all of those businesses anyway, if you are currently paying business rates, your business bill is going to go, because you will no longer have to pay business rates. It will no longer exist. What you might find is that in terms of your rent, your service charge, etc., that might see a small increase, because ultimately the landowner will pass on the cost of the new land value tax onto the business. So you'll lose the business rates bill, and then you might see a smaller increase in terms of rent or service charge, etc. So it hopefully should work out that business will still pay less. That bit I'm not too concerned about, but for small businesses who currently fall under the small business rates threshold, who aren't paying anything, if we were to go forward straight with this system of land value tax, online sales tax, we might end up asking them to pay a little bit more through their rent or through their service charge, etc.
Yeah.
So they go from paying nothing to something. So that is something we would need to consider the impact on.
And I think another important, you know, let's be honest, apart from people like ourselves who kind of think about this for our job, most people and even business owners don't really know what happens with their business rates. And I think a key part of this reform is about what happens with the money. Because this has to be a process of education. It has to be a process of awareness raising. So, you know, we've been taxed for something. What happens with that money? Where does it go? Who's responsible for it? You know, I've been involved in setting up business improvement districts, as you know, and the argument is always, this is the amount of money that you're contributing, but this is what you get in return. And I think people knowing what you, like, we pay general taxation, we kind of hear our politicians tell us what they're spending it on. Business rates kind of goes into this kind of murky world, and most people, in all honesty, don't really know what happens with it. And I kind of think, you know, reform has to kind of set that out clearly as well. So
I think that's a very fair comment.
Yeah, OJ, just perhaps just an observation from me. I think, you know, as we've all said, and we were obviously on that conversation with Welsh Gov, I think, you know, the current system doesn't work. It does need to change. I suppose the only slight concern that sort of jumps to my mind at the moment is where, you know, we just touched on, you know, the land owners passing that cost down to the businesses. I suppose it's, where is the transparency then from those business owners, or landowners, sorry, that they are only passing down that new liability to the business owner and not using it as a reason to say, well, you know, we're going to inflate it by X amount, not necessarily just covering the replacement for business rates, but then using it as a way of making extra money. So I think it's just how can that system, if it does end up being directly with the landowners, how do we ensure that the businesses themselves then are not going to, you know, be subject to being taken advantage of because the system changes? So I think that's the only slight concern I would have around it.
Yeah, it is something that's been discussed before, because I know the land value tax has been looked at before, and there was never really if I remember the conversations correctly, there was never a solution people could come up with to say, right, let's have some transparency in terms of the costs and the system. And there's all sorts of ways around it. So I don't think that was ever followed through. One of the things I would say, though, is that this tax is very different in terms of the business rates tax, in terms of if the land isn't being used, if the property isn't being used, and ultimately all the costs will fall on the landowner. And so the landowner has a financial incentive to make sure that that land is actually being used productively, or else all the bills are going to fall on them. And it's difficult to avoid those bills. They are the principal bill payer when it comes to the tax. And so if they pass the cost down at a rate which is just too high and unaffordable for any business to take up, and property remains empty, then the cost of that all falls on the landowner. Whereas with the current business rate system, where you can have high rents, at the moment there's too many property owners who can find ways round of getting themselves exemptions or don't necessarily care, etc. I think because of this is flipping the tax system, it's very difficult for those landowners to be able to get hold of those loopholes. They will end up paying the cost if their land isn't being used. And so you do have that financial incentive there for them to make sure that the land is appealing to businesses that might want to occupy property that sits on that land.
Yeah, and I don't, to be honest, I don't disagree with any of that. I think the vacant side of it is totally, you know, it should work, you know, to the favour of the system, you know, if that's the case. I think where I'm perhaps more thinking about is where you've had long-standing tenants, perhaps haven't had rent increases for a while, you know, then the system changes, and then, you know, they use that as a way of, you know, inflating, not, you know, the rents to service charges or whatever by a proportion that is higher than what the business, the replacement business rates bit then the land tax is essentially doing. I think that's the only, you know, I suppose, air of caution I would have. But the principles of everything that you've said, I think, you know, they seem reasonable. It's again just goes down to, as always, the practicalities of how it works, doesn't it?
It does, and it, you know, it is something that needs to be worked through. I think that the issue of passing down costs, I think, is something we have to bear in mind. I know it is a very real concern.
Yeah. Has anybody else got any comments they want to make?
Just one point really on with some of our landlords, obviously some of them you know, could afford to pay this, but there are some that have got properties that perhaps are difficult to, you know, to let, difficult to sell. So will there be a plan for the, because in every case when you build somebody, there is an affordability, even with a landlord, you know, are you going to build in where there is a hardship for them to pay? Because they could very well not have the means to pay it. It's an asset that they're looking to get rid of, but they can't. You could end up with somebody then that you've got to go down some type of recovery route as well. So that's just something to think of for the landlords that will struggle as well, even though most should be okay. I really like the two systems that you know, that we will be looking at the digital sales as well. I think that really does kind of balance the fairness of the system as well. So I think both working together will work well, but there's just got to be thought about how you will collect and how on the occasions where people can't meet those costs, how they will be supported as well.
Yeah, fair, very fair comment. And I think to add to that as well, another comment which I probably should have put in the slides, one thing we'll need to consider is ultimately the taxes collected will be used to support local services. When it's an online sales tax, it might be that in order to make it work officially, maybe it's something that's done at UK level, so that tax is collected, but then there has to be a fair way to make sure the money collected is redistributed to all of those local authorities to invest in their local services. That's really difficult with an online sales tax, which has the ability to be collecting money effectively globally from anyone, anywhere, is making sure you repatriate that tax collection with the local authority, the right local authority anywhere in the UK. So thinking about geography as well is important for an online sales tax, and investing in local services.
Okay. Has anybody else got any more observations on what OJ has presented? OJ, what is the plan after this? Are you going to circulate and then seek feedback? Is that the intention?
So what I will do is, at the right opportunity, I will have more of these discussions with members across the network. And also, Amy, what we'll do is we'll have this conversation with regards to the ATCM board and advisory council as well.
Yeah.
And we'll go through the details, and then we will approach. It sounds like at the moment, in terms of the general election, the Conservative Party is not pursuing rates reform, but the Labour Party is. So we'll probably do that discussion with the Labour Party, and then we'll also have a discussion with the Welsh Government as well, who we know is looking at long-term rates reform.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Okay. Right. There's no more comments, OJ. So I don't know if you want to move on to the next bit, which was the licensing bit, wasn't it?
Yeah, cool. So this bit is much quicker and much less complicated. I think you'll be all happy to know. So hang on, bear with me. So I'll try and get through this really quickly and let you all go on time. So, sorry, can you all see the slide which says Licensing Act 2003?
Yeah. Okay.
Right, so we know the impact of social distancing on the hospitality sector. It's been pretty grim for the sector, with businesses having to close completely, and then when they finally got the chance to open, it was with significant trading restrictions. So in order to help them with regards to trading, what was done is that there was temporary deregulation around both the use of payment licenses and outdoor space, but also in terms of on-site, off-site sales, which goes alongside that. So what was done was the Business and Planning Act 2020 was introduced. This provided regulatory easements which enabled any on-sales premises license holder to automatically do off-sales without the need to amend their license. And that's temporary and is now due to lapse at the end of September this year. So what used to happen was that if you sold alcohol on site, you would then have to apply to amend your license to be able to sell alcohol off-site. Because of the pandemic, what the government allowed was that all on-site license holders, when they closed, they were allowed to sell alcohol with takeaway meals, and then when they reopened, they just allowed them to be able to sell, do off sales as well. And the government is consulting on making this permanent. So they're asking three options: is, do we want to let the easements lapse and require all license holders to have to apply for on sales and off sales separately? Or do we want to keep the easements and allow any existing license holder or any future license holder to be able to automatically do off sales if they have an on sales license? Or the third option, do we only allow a license holder to be able to do off sales, but only covering the area in which their pavement license covers? So yes, they can sell drinks for outdoor consumption, but those drinks can only be consumed within the area of their pavement license. So that's it. much easier than business rates, I'm thankful to say. Does anybody have any objections to making this permanent? And Carl, can I bring you in actually, because I know this has been a big issue in York, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. I suppose slightly different. I mean, just for a quick bit of context, the council in York took it upon themselves to, I suppose, go against the government a little bit. It was because of a lot of noise coming from access in the city centre. If anyone knows York, you'll know the medieval people and the Vikings and the Romans were quite selfish when they built it. They didn't think about wheelchairs or guide dogs or anything like that. So the long story short, it went through our full council meeting, and pavement, the rules changed around pavement cafes in favour of access. And what it meant is that as of yesterday, we've got 51 pavement cafes in the city right now, compared to last year when we had about 140. So it's more the legislation to allow pavement cafes. As far as I know, we've kept this. We've allowed them to keep the off sales on sales. I mean, I don't know what other people have found in York. Very few people have taken it on outside of their pavement cafe. For a couple of years, we did outside seating, and we tried to create a direct benefit where people could buy. You know, the whole reason was that off sales existed. You could take it across the road to a picnic bench that we had in a green space. But really, we found that those green spaces, those picnic benches, were used as a nice little oasis kind of while you're in a busy city, but it was never really used as a direct benefit other than for one pub, which really benefited. So yeah, for my two penneth, I definitely think it should be eased. I do quite like the idea of keeping it within a pavement cafe. So it's still the responsibility of the licensee, because yeah, we had a couple of conversations early on where even if someone was to walk a mile through the city and then destroy some public infrastructure, there was a suggestion that would still be the responsibility of the most recent licensee that served them. Now, I think that would be quite difficult to enforce, but I think it's technically still how it would work.
Yeah, interesting. So that sounds like option 3, allowing the pavement license area to automatically be used by the on sales license holder. But
that's probably what we would do. Yeah,
not any further than that. Interesting. Does anybody sort of disagree with that? Anybody think it should be more? Anybody that think it should automatically be all off sales?
No, nothing in the group. OJ, I think everybody, there's 2 in the chat that have said option 3, so I think they concur with what Carla said. And just from my perspective, I think, you know, putting that responsibility still with the licensees within the pavement area, I think is probably the most beneficial option. But if anybody else has got any views, obviously just jump in, but it doesn't look like there's any more.
Fab. Thanks, guys. Well, that's it. Second consultation, much easier.
Yeah. In terms of giving feedback on that, OJ, what is because that's a UK Gov consultation, isn't it? So
it's it's with the UK government, but it's only for England and Wales.
Yeah.
So we will also speak to members across England. We might do something on base camp as well to get as many views as possible. And then what we'll do is we can write in a submission on behalf of everyone. If everybody wants to send in your own individual submissions as well, it should be recommended. What I can do is I can send an email with a link to everyone, so you can all take part if you want. I think the deadline's May, so we have got a little bit of time.
Okay. All right, that's great. All right. Has anybody got anything else they wanted to come in on, either on the licensing or any other points? Any requests for future meetings? Obviously this one we didn't bring anybody external in just because we wanted to cover the 2 consultations and the 2 sort of important pieces. But if there's any requests for future, then please jump in now, and obviously myself and OJ then can meet and put together some proposals then for future meetings.
Amy, can I come in a second? I just wanted to ask the group, I run quite a successful shop local campaign where I promote the businesses via social media. I've recently been approached by a piercing shop and tattoo, and also a vape shop. I've steered away from these due to the nature of the business. Previously, I have not promoted them. I just wondered what people's views were in advertising these type of businesses, which, you know, they could be health implications. I'm certainly not going to advertise betting shops, but the tattoo and the piercing shops are very busy in the town, and they do attract a lot of footfall. I just wondered, you know, what people's thoughts were.
I mean, my thought personally was tattoo shop and piercing shop, fine, I wouldn't have a problem with those. The vape shop, however, might be more challenging, because I think there are some health concerns that kids are being attracted to vaping, and rather than it being a case of sort of smokers downgrading to vaping and it being a health benefit, there are some people that don't smoke being attracted to vaping and then almost using that as a step towards smoking. So there are some health concerns around vaping, so I'd be a little bit nervous around promoting that. I don't know if those links are necessarily clear, don't know what evidence there is, but for now, yeah, I'd probably steer clear. Yeah, if you
the Medical Council recently released some information that vaping has actually got 20 times more nicotine in it than what a cigarette has. So if you haven't been a smoker and you start vaping, you get addicted very quickly. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the tar in it, which is what causes the problem, but they don't know what the long-term results are. The other thing as well about that is your tattoo places and your piercing places are actually licensed and checked by your environmental health, by trading standards, aren't they? Because they get a license for that, whereas the other one probably doesn't.
Yeah, and that was something. So obviously I worked with Kieran at Blaen y Gwent, and that was something very much along the lines that we were talking about. I think we felt, you know, the vaping side of it was probably a no-go, but that when we do, because we do them as sort of mini ads to say around the shop, you know, shop local in the specific business, what I think we're just planning to do with those is put something on there to say that they are regulated by Blaen y Gwent, and that obviously if they want any more then around their license or their, you know, how they're regulated as a business for the tattoo and the piercings, then they can obviously go to our environmental health department then to check some of those details and, you know, whether there are any concerns about the business. So that was where we were, I think, heading to go with it. But it was just to see, you know, how others, you know, if they've done any particular promotion around businesses, you know, do they mention any of these in their promotions, really?
Yeah, that's really useful to understand, actually. Thanks for that, Karen.
No problem, thank you.
Okay, all right, anybody got anything else? No. Okay, right, well, thanks, George. Yeah, just a big thank you from me and obviously from everybody, and OJ, just thank you all for attending. It's nice to see some different faces here today as well, which is really good. Hopefully we can continue to bring more people on board with the sessions. And if there's anything outside of the meetings that you want to send through as ideas for meetings, please let us know. More than happy to do that. Contact us outside of the meetings if there's anything as well. And thank you very much for your time. We're only 5 minutes over, which is really good. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.